Baruch atah Yahweh Eloheinu melech haolam, asher bachar banu mikol ha'amim v'natan lanu et torato. Baruch atah Yahweh noten haTorah b'shem Yeshua Mashiach. Amen. So, where did we leave off? Who remembers? Mi zocher.
Cares remember.
Who remembers?
Right. You know I do now, Daniel.
I know, yeah, well, we'll see.
Well, we left off with the part when we were talking about well, we did a bunch. We did the whole thing with the gates opening, the putting on the garments, awake, that being a key word that we were looking at. And
we talked about three themes, and you mentioned one of them, and that's being awake. But we talked about three themes that are related to Yom Teru'ah. So we really need to name those other two before we proceed.
The marriage.
Yep.
Mm-hmm. And the dressing in the garments.
Yeah, that would be part of the wedding theme, though.
Okay. Oh, the coronation of the king.
There we go. So we talked about arising from the dead being a theme, and so essentially resurrection is a theme of Messiah. That's part of the awake theme that you mentioned already. So resurrection, the coronation of the king, and the wedding, and in particular the wedding of the king, because we actually looked at that. If I remember right, I think we looked at one of the weddings of a king. If we didn't, then we probably need to. But there is an example of one of the kings getting married at the beginning of the year. I'm pretty sure we read it. I thought we read it, but
I don't see it.
But nonetheless, those are the themes, and we kind of left off at the end of looking at that awakening theme, well, almost at the end, because we're going to pick up there before we move on. If you remember, we finished off in Daniel chapter 12 is where we left off. So we're going to kind of go back a layer and revisit that idea a little bit, and then we'll move on. I've got a lot I want to do tonight. I don't know if we'll finish, but we'll just have to see. So let's go to Tehillim, chapter 7. And I do want to revisit this a little bit. So verse 7 says, "Arise, O Yahweh, in your anger, lift up yourself in indignation against my adversaries." Who remembers that word in a verse that we quoted last week? Anybody? Indignation. Bueller? Somebody?
Nope, I don't remember.
What about go into your chederim?
Until the indignation passes.
Until the indignation passes over. That's right.
Yeah.
Okay, so arise, O Yahweh, in your anger, lift up yourself in indignation against my adversaries. Yes, awake for me at the judgment. You could say, awake me at the judgment. And I want you to consider that. Let's look at that in Hebrew.
7:7. Wait.
I got to get there. Just bear with me. I can't search in the Hebrew version yet, so just bear with me. I may have a wrong reference here. It doesn't seem to be matching my other reference. Let me find this another way. Might have put down the wrong reference. It appears I did. I'll find it. Hang on.
Oh.
What's it now here?
Okay, it's I should have known. Why didn't y'all tell me I wasn't in Psalms?
Oh, look,
You're in Zechariah.
We can't see it.
Oh yes, you can. I'm sharing it.
look, who can't see it? Yes, it's right there, but I didn't look at it. I just.
Well, I mean, it's too small.
Oh, yeah, it is kind of small, but you gotta go like this.
I have to get my jeweler's loop.
Okay, yeah. It helps if you get the right book.
That's it. That's it right there. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And then
Arise, O Yahweh, in your anger. Lift up yourself in indignation against my adversaries. Yes, awake for me at the judgment which you have commanded. So what I wanted to look at, Ura Elai Mishpat
yep.
Tzivita. Arise upon me at the judgment which you have commanded, and let the assembly of the peoples encompass you about. Va'adat leumim, the assemblies of the peoples, tesovevecha ve'alea lamarom shuvah. And over them may you return on high, or upon them you will return on high. Okay. I'm going to read one more verse. O Yahweh, who ministers judgment to the peoples, judge me, O Yahweh, according to my tzedakah and according to my integrity that is in me. So there's a lot of stuff about, it's arise, and it's Yahweh arising, and you're going to see that his arising seems to go along with ours, with our awakening. That's the point that I'm trying to make. But awake for me, you could say, is awake me at the judgment. You see what I'm saying?
Yep.
Okay. which you have commanded, and let the assembly of the peoples encompass you about. So who remembers in Revelation 4 what happened? In the Hebrew chapter 4. Just summarize it briefly.
He was caught up.
Yochanan was caught up, and then what? Then what do we see?
He went into
Huh?
The description of the throne.
right, the throne room.
Yeah, what did we see?
Was it a multitude of people?
A multitude of people assembled how?
Round about the throne.
Around his throne.
Circle,
Right.
yeah.
Right.
You see how
Yes.
this arise at the judgment, await me for the judgment, which you have commanded, and let the assembly of the peoples encompass you about. That's exactly what happens in the Hikalut. Right?
Right.
Yes.
And over them may you return on high, or upon them will you return on high. Okay? O Yahweh, who ministers judgment to the peoples, judge me, O Yahweh, according to my what?
Righteous.
Tzedakah.
My righteousness and my integrity that is in me. And so a lot of people don't realize that there are multiple judgment days. All right? So another theme of Yom Teru'ah is Yom Hadin, Judgment Day. And it's the judgment of the righteous. And that's what you're seeing here. And the judgment of the righteous happens concurrently or at the same time as the punishment on the wicked, the tribulation on the wicked. Okay? And so what you're seeing here in brief in this Tehillah is a description of that.
Daniel,
Arise, O Yahweh, in your anger, lift up yourself in indignation against my adversaries. We've been fighting the adversary for 2,000 years.
Mm-hmm.
And Elohim is going to arise on that same day in the sense of sending indignation on the enemies. Did you raise your hand on purpose, Maureen?
I did. Which Tehillah are you reading from?
7.
Thank you.
Yeah.
7:7.
You see that? That's a 7 right there. You can't see that?
I don't speak Hebrew. I mean, I speak Hebrew. I don't speak it either. Do any of it. You know what? Messiah's going to teach me like this.
That's
And
right.
I got a question.
Yeah.
So when we talk about righteousness, I know there's an act of righteousness, but then we also, when we talk about raising the righteous, are we talking about those who have accepted Messiah and he became our righteousness?
He became our righteousness and we preserved it.
So there's a right standing, there's a state of being, out of sin. And so but this one is talking about the righteousness of our deed. When it talks about so judged according to my righteousness, or is it both? Well, it can't be both because he wouldn't be there if he wasn't righteous.
Well, so our righteous deeds are linked with our justification before God. No one does a righteous deed in and of themselves. Okay? Our Jewish people who do not believe in Messiah do righteous deeds all day long, but they're not counted as righteous before God because they haven't come to trust. You get what I'm saying? So, and by the same token, a believer, someone who says they believe in Yeshua and has received the gift of cleansing in the blood of Messiah, but then does not walk in righteous deeds, it kind of negates what happened to them on the inside. And that's why Yeshua says in Hebrews 10, it's worse for them than it was at the beginning. Okay? So for this group of people, my personal assessment is that it has to be those who are justified by their trust in Messiah and who have integrity enough to walk in the commandments.
Okay.
Okay? And again, I'm going to qualify that because it doesn't mean that only Messianic people are going, or only people who keep the Sabbath are going, or only people who wear tzitzit are going. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about having actual trust and faith in the resurrection of Yeshua such that you receive the cleansing down on the inside of the blood of Messiah and a transformative experience that then compels you to walk in the commandments. And there are many, many Christian believers who have that. They are just still trapped in bad doctrine. I do believe that Abba is calling them out and trying to create a spotless bride for himself. That doesn't mean that by the same token, not all people who keep the Sabbath and wear tzitzit, not all of them are righteous. A lot of them don't truly trust in Yeshua. They're trusting in their own efforts.
Right.
So it's a fine line. So to me, it's both. You have to have an imparted righteousness that is a response from God based on the faith of the person calling out in contrition, saying, I have sinned against you and you alone, and I need to be saved. And I've met a lot of people who don't have that, and yet they walk in the commandments. They say that they believe in God. They say that they believe that keep the Sabbath. So it's to me, the people that are going to assemble around his throne are those who are humble and contrite and desire not to sin and pursue his righteousness and walk in the integrity of keeping his commands. And I think it's a very small group of people. So, but I think it's bigger than some people think. So hopefully that's a sufficient answer. I might have ran too long on it.
That was good. Thank you.
That's good.
Okay. So what I want you to take away is to see that Elohim is arising, and when he arises, he wakes up certain people. This matches the scriptures that we looked at last week. Okay. Let me call it up over here so you can see it in English. I'm sitting here looking at the Hebrew.
Bless you.
Arise, O Yahweh, in your anger, lift up your indignation against my adversaries. Awake for me at the judgment. You could take that for me out. You could say, awake me at the judgment which you have commanded. And let the assemblies of the people encompass you about. And then he said, and then we say to him who ministers judgment to the peoples, judge me according to my righteousness. And so the thing that I'm trying to point out, and we're going to go to, is another theme of Yom Teru'ah is judgment. But I'm not yet technically looking at that, but it's associated with his arising and with our arising. So they're going to tie together. Is everybody with me?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. Let's see if I have the right reference on the next one. Psalm 17, Tehillah 17.
17.
I'm just trying to figure out where I want to start. I started at the end because the verses I'm looking at are at the end.
Ooh, that's pretty.
So let's start in Seven. Make your compassions work wonderfully, O you that save by your right hand from assailants them that take refuge in you. Keep me as the Ishon Ain. Hide me in the shadow of your wings from the wicked that oppresses, my deadly enemies that encompass me about. Their gross heart they have shut tight. With their mouth they speak proudly. At our every step they have now encompassed us. They set their eyes to cast us down to the earth. He is like a lion that is eager to tear in pieces, and like a young lion lurking in secret places. Arise, O Yahweh, confront him. Cast him down. Deliver my soul. And I'm just betting on that deliver word there, that it's associated with one of the Natsal words.
Lot.
And that's verse 13. Kumayawa kadma panav hachlieu. Yes. That's another word that I gave you. That's one of the three words that I gave you. I can't remember when it was. For Natsal. Palata nafshi mirasha chirbecha. Deliver my soul from the evil by your sword. From men by your hand, O Yahweh, from men of the world whose portion is in this life and in whose belly you fill with your treasure, who have children in plenty and leave their abundance to their babes. As for me, I shall behold your face in tzedakah. I shall be satisfied, and this is the thing that I wanted to show you. He arose, right?
Yes.
He cast down Hasatan. Do you see it?
Yes.
And then we behold his face in righteousness when I awake with your likeness. Anybody remember the verse? When we shall behold him, we shall be as he is. I'm just recalling the verse.
Yeah.
Go see him face to face.
We shall be as he. There's several verses in the Brit Hadashah that tell us that we shall be as he is, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so that's what you're seeing there. So, so we have in the Tanakh, we have just a bit of a recap from last week. We have in the Tanakh very little in the Torah about Yom Teru'ah, and then just deeper levels of discussion about it in the rest of the scriptures. And what we talked about last week that I really wanted you to zero in on is that our Jewish people were given by prophets, by King David, by Solomon, by Ezra and Nehemiah, the worship that was given to, the customs of the temple that were given to them by men who had the Ruach HaKodesh, who were moved by the Ruach of Elohim in order to create these things. And these are the words that surround, what I'm drawing from you is from scriptures, but I'm not arbitrarily doing it, is the point that I'm trying to make, is our Jewish people have associated these words with Yom Teru'ah for eons, for millennia, okay? And so there are themes of Yom Teru'ah that we are looking at here, not just arbitrary verses. Does everybody, did that come out right?
Yes.
Okay, so we've looked at the crowning of the king. We've looked at the marriage of the king. We've looked at awakening from sleep and that being actually resurrection from the dead. And now what we're seeing is that the timing of that is at the same time as Elohim beginning to judge the earth. So I want you to go to Joel now, Joel.
Great.
Hey, there's Daniel.
Hey, buddy.
Hi, Daniel.
Hey, guys. So sorry. I had a moment, and I was like 7:30. We're on, and 3 minutes late. So,
Shalom, shalom.
shalom, shalom, my people, my blessed, beautiful, wonderful people.
Likewise.
All right, so actually, before we do this, let's go back to, because we talked about it last week, but what we didn't, as I remember, I don't think we went there. So let's go to Shemot, chapter 19. Exodus 19. I think we might have looked at it. Now that I'm looking at it, I think we may have, or I did in my studies. And I think we did read this, but I want to. I didn't show it to you in the Hebrew, so I'm going to read it in the English, and I'm going to bounce over to the Hebrew because I want to show you something.
1913.
I am actually looking in verse 18.
18.
Har Sinai was altogether a smoke because Yahweh descended upon it in fire, and the smoke thereof ascended as the smoke of a furnace, and the whole mount quaked greatly. And when the voice of the shofar waxed louder and louder, which those who blow a shofar know that that's impossible to do as a human being, Moshe spoke, and Elohim answered him by a voice. And Yahweh came down upon Har Sinai to the top of the mount, and Yahweh called Moshe to the top of the mount, and Moshe went up. And Yahweh said unto Moshe, go down, charge the people, lest they break through to gaze, and many of them perish. So we pointed out the fact that it was the voice of a shofar, and that it got louder and louder. Now, who remembers, we talked about the 3 shofars of prophecy. What are they?
First, last, great.
The first, the
First.
second, and the last.
The first, the great. I'm
No,
sorry.
yeah, that's right. The first, great.
First, the last, and the great.
Like a bunch of clowns.
First, the last, and the great.
First shofar, the last shofar, and the great shofar. Which one is this?
This one is the first.
Yeah, it's the first.
This is the first shofar. And we talked about that a little bit last week. But what I wanted to show you is, let me see how fast I can get there without being able to search. Okay. Verse 18, let me find it. Har Sinai shan kulo, and the mount was altogether a smoke. Mipnei asher yarad alav Yahweh, before Yahweh descended upon it in fire, vaya'al Asheno and his cloud, and then vayeherad kol hahar me'od, and the mountain trembled very greatly. All right, vayehi kol hashofar holech bechazek me'od Moshe. All right, now this is throwing me because that wasn't the word that I was expecting. Let me look in here, and I should have looked this up before we got here. Tell you what I'll do. Do it this way. It might be in a different chapter now that I'm thinking about it. Oh, there it is. All right, so it's back up there. It is in 13. That's what it is.
Aha.
Okay. Hayovel Emayalu Bahar. I want you to see this. When the Yovel sounds long, they shall come up to the mountain. Do you see that?
Yep.
Yeah.
Why does it say Yovel there and shofar here? Anybody know?
Hmm.
The Yuvel, would that be because it's Moed?
No,
No? Okay.
no. And it's unfair. Many of you are not going to know this because it's just the nature of Hebrew. It's two words for the same thing. And what this is telling you is what kind of shofar it is. A Yovel is a ram's horn.
Okay.
Oh, so let me write that down.
Okay. Yuvel's a ram's horn. Okay.
Mm-hmm. So the Yovel that you're thinking of in the sense of what most people know as a jubilee
Right.
is
Yes.
obviously not a ram's horn, but it must
Right.
be associated with it. All right?
Right.
And I do believe it is. And this is what we talked about a few weeks ago, and we're probably going to talk about it again here tonight. But I want you to see this. This is at the blast of the shofar on Mount Sinai at Shavuot. Okay? And so this was a pivotal moment in Earth's history. To me, it's one of the biggest moments. The whole world ought to be talking about it because God visited the earth and the Jewish people looked up, and a bunch of Egyptians and foreign nationals that had joined them in their journey looked up and saw the feet of God, or at least the elders saw the feet of God, but they saw the cloud and the smoke and they heard his voice.
Right.
Okay. Either we believe that actually happened and millions of people saw all of this, or this book is fictitious. It's one or the other. It can't be both. And so what's the association with the Yovel? You should remember this. God told Noah, I will number man's days to 120 years.
Right.
The Yovel is a 50-year cycle. We're going to talk about the World Week here in a minute. We've reviewed it. We've gone over it in brief, I think, in previous studies in this series. I'm not 100% sure. We've talked about so much. But a Yovel cycle is 50 years long. So the World Week is 7,000 years long, the last 1,000 years being the millennium that Messiah will rule on earth. And so the 6,000 that are before that are the days of mankind. And if you take 6,000 and divide it by 50, I promise you, unless math has changed with Common Core, 6,000 divided by 50 is 120.
Right.
So there are 120 Yovel cycles appointed for man. I personally firmly believe that. And when we get to that last Yovel, whenever it is, and that's the thing, is man stopped keeping track of it. Our Jewish people stopped tracking it. They were doing their job and then they quit because they went off into idolatry, and then they got prideful in themselves and they quit doing it. Okay, and they were scattered and they didn't have a temple to do it by anyway. So my point is that all of these feasts are tied together in some way, and they're all about pointing to Messiah and showing us his plan and giving us even the timing of it. It's because we have boogered it up that we don't have precisely when it is. We can't possibly know when the Yovel is, but like you should remember, I do believe that it's entirely possible that it could be 2027, which means that the last 7 years that Daniel told us about has to happen starting this fall. Again, I'm not calling it. I'm not saying it is going to happen. I'm saying it's entirely possible, more so than I've ever seen it in my life. So, and it's associated with the blasting of the shofar. So the first shofar is on Shavuot. The last shofar, you should remember, is on Yom Teru'ah. The great shofar is on Yom Kippur, but that'll be 7 years later. We're going to talk about that here in a minute. All right, but I just wanted you to see that. Is everybody good?
Yes.
So we have Elohim rising at the same time that people rise from the dead, and we have those who rise from the dead seeing his face and being made into his likeness when I awake with your likeness. If you didn't write down Tehillah, chapter 17, verse 13, shame on you. I will awake with you when I awake with your likeness. That's the resurrection. I have no doubt about that. Okay? So let's see if Yeshua talked about this whole, let's see if he used any Yom Teru'ah themes when he talked about the end times. And what's everybody's favorite Yeshua end time message?
24, Matthew.
Matthew 24.
Matthew chapter 24, that's right.
Are we not doing Yoel?
Oh, yeah, let's do that. I forgot that's where I was going. And and it's going to back up what we're seeing in the Psalms there. Thanks for that.
No, I got you.
Mm-hmm. Look at the name of the portion for this. What does that mean?
Ha'azu.
Azinu. Does anybody know what it means?
I'm thinking hallelujah, but no.
Well, it's the root word is ozen, which means ear. It means give ear. It means listen to this. So the name of the portion, which is assigned much later by our Jewish people, says, listen to this, the blast of the shofar in Sion. Consecrated fast, call a solemn assembly, gather the people, consecrate the congregation. But that's not the one we want because that's a fast. When is that?
Yom Kippur.
Yom Kippur. So let's back up. Blast the shofar in Sion, sound an alarm. Let all the inhabitants of the land tremble for the day of Yah. Remember I told you last week in the Hikalut that Yochanan was in the Spirit in Revelation chapter 1? Says he was in the Spirit on Yom Teru'ah.
Right.
People call this the day of the Lord, and Christians think it's Sunday. It's not. For Yom Teru'ah comes, for it is at hand. This is the day of judgment, and it begins on Yom Teru'ah. So there's confusion as to whether Yom Teru'ah is Yom Teru'ah or Yom Kippur. I submit to you it is both, because both of these events will be in the one, it's actually the 7th millennium. That's his day. Because you're going to see when you study out that day, you're going to see all of this anger and God arising like we just looked at, and punishing, bringing indignation and tribulation on the world, and doing all these, expressing his anger and actually disciplining the world with his wrath. That's all happening on the day of Yehuah. And at the same time, it's a day of sweetness and delight and joy and all these good things. How is that dichotomy of ideas possible for a single day?
Well, you have some that are going to be caught up, and then you have some that are going to be disciplined.
Bingo.
At the same time. And so it starts from one point to the other point, and it ends.
That's right. So it's happening in two different realms.
Yeah.
All right. In the realm of the earth, where Hasatan has been cast down, and where mankind has rebelled for thousands of years, it is time to punish them. And that's why Elohim is arising. He's arising to punish the earth. That's his day. If you remember, Yeshua stood up in the synagogue and at the very beginning of his ministry in his hometown synagogue, and he read Yeshayahu chapter 61. Ruach Adonai Yahweh alai yamashach Yahweh utiv levaser anavim shalachani lachvosh lenishparei lev. And you know it. If I thought a minute, I could finish it in Hebrew. But he has anointed me to declare good news, to declare basically the Yovel, liberty to the captives. Okay, everything that he said, everything that he read out of Isaiah 61, verse 1 and 2a, was Yovel language. Okay, and And then where did Yeshua stop and what did he not read out of 2b?
Didn't
Isaiah
stop.
61 verse 2b.
He stopped at the day of division.
The day of the vengeance of Eloheinu. Yeshua came to declare the day of the vengeance of our God. But he did not read that verse. That to me is very, very significant. And for those of you who were around a few years ago when I taught at Ketz, the time of the end, that was our anchor verse because it basically broke the menorah in half, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Let me get a file up and we'll look at it. Give me just a second.
The Lord's version.
And it'll come up eventually, I hope. Okay, here it comes, and I'll share it. And you're familiar with this. I just want us looking at it when we're talking about it. Remember that?
Yes.
Yes.
Maybe I need another one, but this will do. Now let's do another one. Let me get the other one. I opened the wrong one. Here we go. You see that one?
Yes.
Okay. And I know most of you probably know this, but I know some of you probably don't have it nailed down yet. And so what I'm talking about is Yeshua did all of this stuff first time he came. Do you see my arrow moving around, or do you just see
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
First 4.
Yeah.
First 3.
So he fulfilled Passover, Matzot, first Omer, and Shavuot, and by doing that, he set captives. Didn't he walk around and literally give sight to the blind?
Yes.
Didn't he walk around and literally free people from their oppression in their bodies and demonic oppression?
Yep.
And isn't that what he has been doing for the last 2,000 years, is setting people free and giving us liberty?
Yes.
Okay. And then he stops and says, and the day of the vengeance of our Elohim. And he didn't say that. And so he held off on beginning to fulfill this. And then if you continue reading in Isaiah, especially through chapter 63, you see the day of the vengeance of our Elohim, and you see that same thing in the Hikkalud in Revelation chapter 19. Okay? But his vengeance begins when he arises and when he raises people from the dead. And that begins on Yom Teru'ah. It's the next. We're going from right to left here, right?
Yes.
Because we're Hebrew. We go from right to left. Passover is first. It's first in the feast listed in the yearly feast listed in Vayikra in Leviticus 23. And these are their order: Passover, Matzot, first Omer, and Shavuot. So this one is the next in line, and I can't unsee this. This is why I believe that Yom Teru'ah is so critical, and why, I can't ignore it. And with all of the stuff that we've talked about this is to me what sets the Natsal at the beginning of the tribulation, is that menorah right there. Okay? I can't get around it. I've looked at it in other ways, and I can't ignore this, because this is too significant, having already happened. Does everybody agree?
Yep.
Yes.
Okay. Let me find my, there we go. So here he's saying, blast the shofar, sound an alarm, the day of darkness and gloominess, day of clouds and thick darkness, blackness spread upon the mountains. A fire devours before them. This is the people that are sent to punish Israel, and that happens at the end of the tribulation, but it's still happening at the beginning of the judgment. Nothing escaping the appearance of them is the appearance of horses, and horsemen do they run like a noise of chariots. And this is all the wrath of it. We're not going to read it, but it's the heavens tremble, the sun and the moon become dark. The stars withdraw their shining. He utters his voice before his army. For his camp is very great, for he is mighty that executes his devour. For great is Yom Teru'ah, and very terrible, who can abide it? Yet turn unto me with all your heart, with fasting and weeping and lamentation, and rend your heart and not your garments, and turn unto Yahweh your Elohim. He is gracious, merciful, long-suffering. And then we see this next shofar. Blast the shofar in Zion, consecrate a fast, call an assembly, gather the people. Consecrate the congregation, assemble the elders, gather the children, those that nurse at the breast. Let the bridegroom go forth from his cheder, and the bride out of her chuppah. Now, I'm getting a little ahead of myself, but I wanted you to see that this is on the other end of that 7 years.
Mm-hmm.
Do you honestly think that Yeshua is going to call the bridegroom out
Wow, that's good.
in a
Yeah.
war? Out of the chuppah, out of the. Do you realize what the cheder and the chuppah is?
Yes.
It's a place of.
No, please tell us.
What was that, Daniel?
I was just asking for a validation on what those two things were.
Cheder is both of them mean basically the same thing, but cheder is room and chuppah is canopy. So it's the bed chamber. Okay, it's basically the same room. The bridegroom and the bride don't sleep in separate rooms, especially when they just got married. And so you remember, Yom Teru'ah is the day of the wedding. How long is the wedding ceremony in Jewish tradition?
7
days.
7 days, yes.
All right. So here, the bridegroom and the bride are coming out of the chuppah. So that's 7 days after that blast that we just read about.
Daniel,
Yes.
this completely, oh my gosh, like a light bulb has come on. This completely dispels the hypothesis that the bride is not taken up in the beginning. You know how there's a mid-trib and a post-trib and all of that?
Right.
Joel completely wipes that out, I think, by what we just read.
Everything about Yom Teru'ah does to me, but you're right. This kind of seals the deal for me.
This seals the deal.
That does seal the deal.
Huh? Doesn't it?
It does.
Wow. There's never been this strong of a connection to me with that whole thing.
Because the only way you can come out is if you're up there.
That's right.
Exactly. Yes.
And so you have these bookended shofars. You have it starting with this blast.
Wow.
And all the vengeance of God being meted out. and then you have another blast. And if you are aware that this is Yom Teru'ah, and you can probably just about bet your boots it is. And if I remember right, there's something about the gates in here, but I'd have to just look. Okay, but nonetheless, so you have this blast of the shofar, and you have all this wrath being poured out, and then you have another blast of the shofar, and it looks a little bit like Yom Teru'ah, the great shofar. So remember, the great shofar is Yom Teru'ah.
No, the great shofar.
I'm sorry, I misspoke. Yom Kippur. The great shofar is Yom Kippur. Gather the people, consecrate the congregation, assemble the elders, gather the children. Let the bridegroom go forth from his cheder. Make yourself a note that she went into the cheder in Isaiah 26.
Oh, my God.
Remember that?
Yep.
Wow.
The chuppah is a canopy. It used to be that kings put canopies over their beds in their bedrooms, right?
Yes.
The chuppah is now symbolically in a Jewish wedding. That's what the bride and groom stand under when they get married.
Right.
And it's her chuppah.
So
Okay.
Daniel, I know at one time you believe that there may be many Netzals catching up.
I wouldn't say many.
Well, each, you had, I think I have this right. You had felt at one time that during that 7-year period, that on Yom Teru'ah, there may be like more that are caught up each Yom Teru'ah. Do you still feel that way?
I don't know that it would be every Yom Teru'ah.
Okay.
I think at least when
Before
the
God's wrath?
witnesses die and lie there for three and a half days, they are raised from the dead. That is a Netzal. That's clear. That's undeniable. It's in the plain meaning of the text. They are caught up to heaven right before the eyes of the whole world. And so I believe that those who have died in Messiah during that time, because many, remember, those two prophets, those two Nevi'im, those two Jewish men will have led many, many people to Messiah. Many thousands of people will come to Messiah during that 3.5 years. And I believe they will be raised from the dead at that point. And so that will be a Netzal. Whether or not others will be physically, I don't think, again, that the transformation, that what we're seeing in 1 Corinthians 15 and 1 Thessalonians 4, I think that's a one-time thing.
Mm-hmm.
So I think, but there is a Netzal, but it's tiny in the sense that it's two men. But I think that there will be some rising from the dead at that point. Those that died for Messiah during that 3.5 years. You got to remember, if you don't believe in Yeshua during that time, you're going to die for it.
Would that be the ones also included, the ones under the altar?
I do believe, yes.
Okay.
You don't know what?
Hey, up, Mary, can't hear you.
No, they weren't believers at the beginning. They were unbelievers, and then they became believers during that time.
Yeah.
There's many people on earth who do not believe right now who will believe. Well, that's a different group of people. That's not virgins, right? They're not virgins right now. They don't know. Okay.
I have a question.
Yes.
Okay, I'm sorry if I'm jumping off, and if I am, you can stop me. But when it talks about that first, in Revelation, it says, and this is the first resurrection. Why do they use that language as first, as
Because there's another one at the end.
But no, this one is the one right at the end when the I think it's 19.
Yeah.
19, where it says, and this is the first resurrection.
Oh, I know what you're talking about. Yeah.
Well,
Let's go on.
we'll get to that. We
Okay.
passed that at a different point. I don't want to go there tonight.
Okay.
But the first resurrection precedes the second death. That resurrection is associated with the second death. Okay, and there's a resurrection of the unrighteous in order that they might die again. And so the first resurrection is the resurrection of the righteous, which comes in waves. It doesn't all happen at once. We talked about this a little bit last week, or maybe I did with someone else, but you see that in the book of Jeremiah and Daniel. You see that first a small group of the elite were taken out of Jerusalem and taken to Babylon, which in that analogy, Babylon kind of represents heaven there. It represents safety in the king's palace. Okay? And then you see another, so it was 3 waves in order to get all the Jews out, bring them to Babylon, which happened to be a good thing for them, because if they were in Jerusalem, they died and had their children and were destroyed. Are you with me?
Okay. Yeah.
So the first resurrection is one resurrection that happens over, it started 2,000 years ago when Yeshua came back from the dead. Okay, so it's technically already going on.
Are you talking about when they got out the graves?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
People rose from the dead. Yeshua himself is the first fruits from among the dead.
Right.
And then the next group to rise from the dead is those that we talked about in 1 Corinthians 15. And then you're going to have at least those 2 witnesses and probably some others rise from the dead halfway through the tribulation. And then you're going to have more people who died during the war who believed in Yeshua, because it's all the Jewish people come to believe in Yeshua halfway through the tribulation. And then some of them die in the war. They're going to rise from the dead because they put their trust in Yeshua. So you have at least 4 different groups of people rising from the dead over a 2,000-year period. That's the first resurrection. The second resurrection is at the very end, when the unrighteous rise from the dead and then die again, a living death, a perpetual death. Everybody got that?
Yep.
Yeah.
Okay. So let's now go to Matthew. Be alert, and we're going to back up if we have to, but we're in verse 42. Be alert, therefore, for you do not know at what hour your Adon will come. And of course, we've already talked about the fact that Yom Teru'ah is a day that no man knows, right?
Right.
Okay. But know this much, that if the Adon of the house knew it with what watch of the night the thief comes, he would keep awake and would not let his house be plundered. For this reason, you also be ready. Ben Ha'adam will come at an hour when you do not expect him. Who then is the faithful and wise servant? I think I've read farther than I wanted to. I want to stop there. I'm going to go ahead and tell you right here, make a note somewhere, that this same language is given in Yochanan Marcos, or Mark chapter 13, and Luca, which is Luke chapter 12. So you have very similar accounts of this in both of those books.
Okay. 13 and 12.
So, Mr. Daniel, it says, Yom Teru'ah is the day that no man knows. Totally see that. But then I felt like I heard something from what you just read a second ago that indicated we wouldn't know. Like, if you knew the day, then you would be ready, as if to indicate we won't know the exact day.
Well, again, that goes to the nature of Yom Teru'ah. And so, if you remember, and I don't know if we've talked about it yet, but in order to determine Yom Teru'ah, in order to certify it, if you will, to declare it, to consecrate it, you have to see the Chodesh. It's the 7th Chodesh. All right. So in antiquity, they kept track of the days, especially in the temple. They had a record-keeping system where they would mark off the days from the previous Chodesh. And so when the moon, when the full moon, the Yareach, the word for moon in Hebrew is Yareach, not Chodesh. When the Yareach would start waning and then disappear, and they watched it long enough to know that it's somewhere between 2.2 days and 2.9 days that they won't see the moon again. Okay? And so they would wait and watch during those days for the Chodesh to show up. And in the summertime, I think that period is a little bit longer. I think it's on the longer end of things. Might be on the shorter end of things because the months are longer. The days are longer, I should say. But anyway, regardless, they'd be waiting to see that Chodesh. And when those 2 days were up, or almost up, and they knew how to time it, they had done it for years and years, they would go out into the fields. They'd go out into the night and wait and look for the Chodesh, look for the crescent new moon. And the priests would be waiting in the temple for these witnesses to come in and testify that they'd seen the Chodesh. And so everybody would be standing around waiting because it's time for a feast. If they declare it, then we're going to party. You know, it's time to blow the shofar for Yom Teru'ah. It's time to offer that burnt offering, right? But what could get in the way of that?
Clouds.
Our atmosphere.
Right, the cloud.
Clouds.
The weather.
Yeah.
The weather, anomalies, storms, dust storms. There's several things, anomalies that could get in the way of that. And so because of that, Yom Teru'ah became a 2-day day of a 48-hour period. And they literally called it the day that no man knows. So even though you know approximately when you should see the moon, that doesn't mean you're going to see it. So it's still, you don't know the day. Are you with me?
And also, knowing the season, the appointed time, the Moedim, when it's supposed to come. So you might not know which year, but you know it's going to happen in that season.
Right. We don't know what year. We have all of these things that Yeshua gave us in the early part of Matthew 24 to look for. And by my estimation, I think all of those things have already happened. And I'm going to read now from Luca, but
Daniel, before you move on, may
I'm
I?
not moving on. I'm reaffirming.
Okay, but may I just say something to Austin, Daniel?
Sure.
It's about Yom Teru'ah. Daniel,
Yes, ma'am.
this is correct me if I'm wrong, Daniel, but this is the only feast that's begins, like Daniel was saying, the Kodesh. They had to see the Kodesh. And,
Kodesh.
okay, I'm sorry. It's on it begins the first day of the month. So there's no way to count to know when that feast is. You have to see the moon. And so that's another thing that sticks in my mind, why the day no man knows, because they couldn't go, on the 7th day of the month, that's when it is. So that's why it becomes a 2-day thing, because you don't know when the first day will begin. Does that make sense to you?
I love it. And Mr. Daniel Houston, Daniel Daddy, he did a great job of explaining, because I think that's correct. The festival, we know it's going to be on the festival, but just if it's going to be for instance, September 18th or October 13th, there's some vacillation that can happen due to the fact that we can't actually see or know the day of the moon. But it will be Yom Teru'ah, whether it's, September 18th or October 1st. That's the only thing to question.
Well, yeah. So just for your edification, you will already know approximately what month it's going to be in, and even down almost to the day once you declare Passover.
Right.
Okay, because Yom Teru'ah, the seventh month, is always exactly 6 months from Passover, from the month of Passover. So what I'm trying to say is, you're right that it in the sense that it moves around on us, and that's a function of the barley, and that's a function of the calendar being shortened and having to be compensated for, just like the Gregorian calendar does with leap year. The Muslim calendar doesn't do it. I don't know if you know it, but the Muslim calendar, the months are never in the same time of the year. Because they follow a purely lunar calendar, and so Ramadan can be in the spring, or it can be in the winter, or it can be in the summer. It can be any time of year. So, but what God did to correct it is give us the barley, and so in the spring, we look for the barley, and we link it to that 13th moon, and if the barley is there, then that 13th moon becomes the first moon. Okay? And so that's how we know that this year it's not going to be in October, it's going to be in September, and it's going to be approximately on the 18th, because we know when the first moon was back in the spring. Okay? So what we don't know is, in regard to the Yom Teru'ah itself for this year, just without prophecy, just when is Yom Teru'ah going to be? We don't know, but we know it's either going to be on the 18th or the 19th, because we know when the moon was. Okay, we've been counting we're almost into the 6th month. I think we just declared the 6th month.
Yeah.
So, but prophetically, as far as the Yom Teru'ah, the last shofar, we know that it could be on the 18th, but we don't know if it is going to be this year prophetically. But this year we have something we've never had before, and that's the possibility of this being a Yovel, falling 7 years before a possible Yovel. So did that stick with you, Daniel? Did you catch that? You're a sharp guy. I think you got it.
No, I totally get it, and thank you for clearing up. The other thing I might suggest is, Daniel, if you mute everybody, and then when we want to speak up, we just tap.
Yeah, it sounds like somebody's got a TV on or something.
Not me.
All right. I prefer if everybody mute yourselves if you've got stuff going on in the background, because then it gives me too much to manage. So if you've got background noise, then mute your line for us. Okay. So now I want to read from Luca, which is, I think this is the congruent passage out of Luke that is in Matthew. But concerning that day and that hour, no man knows, not even the Malachim of heaven. So he adds a little bit to it. Neither Haben, the Son, only Ha'ab, the Father. So Yeshua says that only the Father knows. What is that doing for us? What is he tying this language to when he says that only the Father knows?
The wedding,
The
the
wedding.
Jewish.
He's tying it to wedding customs. And so a groom, when he seals the deal with the bride's father, he promises to build his daughter a house, and he goes away. And only his father can tell him when that house is suitable for a bride. So he will not go get his bride for the wedding until the house is finished and his father says, go get your bride. Okay, so that's what Yeshua is doing here. He's tying it. He's not telling us that we don't have any idea at all when he's coming. He's saying it's a wedding, and when the house is ready, then my father's going to send me to get you. That's why he says, watch, be alert, and pray, for you do not know when that time is. It is just like a man who went on a journey and left his house and gave authority to his servants and to each man his work. And he commanded the porter to keep awake. So that fits the theme, to stay awake, right? Be alert, therefore, for you do not know when the owner of the house will come, in the evening or at midnight or at the cock crow or in the morning.
What verse was that you started reading?
That's out of Luke, but I don't have the verse numbers on me.
Okay.
It's going to be chapter 21, if I'm not mistaken.
That's 21? Ooh.
Luke 21, I think.
Okay.
And so Maddie had said, be alert, therefore, you do not know at what hour your Adon will come, but know this much, that if the Adon of the house knew at what night the thief would come, he would keep awake and would not let his house be plundered. For this reason, you also be ready, for Ben-Hadad will come at an hour when you do not expect him. And that's what happened to the virgins in the very next chapter of Matthew, in 25, verse 4. The wise, and it's the virgins, the wise ones took oil in the vessels with their lamps. And the bridegroom was delayed. They all slumbered and slept. And at midnight there was a cry, behold, the bridegroom is coming. Go out to greet him. Then all the virgins got up and fixed their lamps, and the foolish ones said to the wise ones, give us some of your oil, for our lamps are going out. Then the wise ones answered and said, why? There would not be enough for us and for you. Go to those who sell and buy for yourselves. And while they went to buy, the bridegroom came. And those who were ready entered with him into the wedding house, and the door was locked. Afterward, the other virgins also came and said, Adonenu, Adonenu, open to us. But he answered and said to them, truly I say to you, I do not know you. Be alert, therefore, for you do not know that day nor that hour. So Yeshua is clearly tying this parable, this story, to the same day that he's talking about up here, right? The day and the hour. It's the same day, right? Wouldn't you agree?
Yeah.
So here you're seeing the bridegroom actually come for his bride. Obviously, it's not right for one man to marry 10 women. But this is symbolic of Yeshua and his bride. So the Jewish custom part of it is that a Jewish bride would wait up with her, what we would call her ladies in waiting. It would be her friends that were helping her get ready. How does she know to have her bags packed and be ready to go?
Custom? It was
Nope.
a custom?
Nope.
She's always ready. They're always packed.
She
That
don't
didn't
know.
sound like they were ready to me.
Well,
Supposed to be.
some of them are. Some of them are ready.
Well, but how did she know to go buy oil? Oil will get old if you buy it 2 years before the wedding. How did she know that? I mean,
Does the oil
Fill it up
represent
every day with new.
They
what
fill
is
it
the
every
point,
day.
Maureen?
Gotta be ready.
They would have been watching the house being built to know that it's going to be
Thank
getting
you.
close.
Oh,
Thank you. Even
Okay.
though the Father is the only one who can say the house is ready, everyone sees the house going up.
True.
Copy that. Okay. Yeah.
I also see something here I haven't seen before at the end of that parable where he says, truly I say to you, I do not know you. I'm thinking also of the verse where it says, didn't we prophesy in your name and all this? And he says, I never knew you. It kind of harkens back to the same kind of idea.
Absolutely. So it's an intimacy with Messiah that matters. It's not just a knowledge of him. It's not even serving him or doing things by his power, by his name. That's not what makes you ready. What makes you ready is a loving intimacy with him. And you know, I told you guys this last week, I think. I'm praying that he knows me.
amen.
want to
Amen.
ring his bell. I want him to get tired of me. Okay.
His bosom, I know.
At midnight, there was a cry, behold, the bridegroom is coming. And so what language does that sort of match that we've already talked about?
Wedding, but Rosh Hashanah.
Now I'm speaking of specific scriptures.
The ones from Isaiah.
How so?
The one where it says, come to your Chedarim. Or also Joel.
Yeah, Joel.
Joel 2, come out. Isaiah 26, enter in.
Mm-hmm. Well, come out and enter in are two different things.
Yeah, the from one's first and the Joel second.
Yes.
Those are all correct, but the one I'm looking for is 1 Corinthians 15. The Lord
Holy Spirit wasn't
himself,
here.
Adonai himself will descend with a shout,
Mm-hmm.
with the blast of the shofar. Okay,
We shall be
let's look at this in the Hebrew. Oh, what verse is it? 25:6. And it's been a while since I've read it in Hebrew. I have read it, but it's been a while. I certainly haven't read it as many times as I have the English, so just bear with me.
disclaimer.
But I'm just curious about this. Okay. Zaka is the word. That's a cry. That's a shout. It's not the one I was looking for, but you got to remember this is Hebrew coming from the Aramaic, so I'd have to look at the Aramaic. And since I'm doing a translation, I might change that if it matches Teruah better, because that's effectively what it is. But this would be a similar, very similar word. It's an outcry, a cry out. Come out to meet the bride. Remember Lecha Dodi?
Mm-hmm.
Lecha Dodi Likrat Kala?
Mm-hmm. Awaken, awaken.
There's Likrat right there. Okay, and what is Lecha Dodi associated with?
Shabbat.
Shabbat.
Shabbat. Yeah, the Sabbath, the bride is the Sabbath. The Sabbath is the bride. This is ancient Jewish liturgy, and that's why it's in our Siddur, is because it quotes Ephesians in it, for one thing, and we're going to look at that here in a minute. But Yom Teru'ah, this goes back to what we were talking about at the beginning of this. Yom Teru'ah is the beginning of the 7th millennium. What millennium is that? Don't go too deep. It's right on the surface.
Shabbat.
Shabbat.
Oh, right, yeah.
It's the Shabbat. It's the Sabbath of the world week. Okay? All right. So I just wanted you to see that.
Dress in your garments of splendor, my people.
That's right. So let's go to Kepha.
First Peter.
Howard? First Peter. 2.
Therefore, gird up the loins of your mind be wide awake and hope for the joy that is coming to you at the revelation of Adonai Yeshua HaMashiach.
Daniel Senior, will you take one moment here? Lindsay and I, my wife Lindsay and I, every day when we read the prayers, we're like, what does gird the loins mean? Can you talk about that?
Yeah. So when in ancient Israel, the way that they dressed, men wore what gets translated into English as a girdle. It's basically the binding up of what's between their legs. And so when they were, how do I say this? So if they were attacked, they would be in casual clothes. That's the way we would say it. They would be sort of casually dressed, and they would typically have a tunic on. There would be, it doesn't matter what the top of the tunic looked like, but a tunic goes about to knee length, right? And so a tunic would get in your way if you had to go to war, right? So what they would do is they had a method of, it's kind of similar to what Scotsmen do with their kilt, but they have a method of tying up the lower part of their garment tied around their loins, and, tying it up, so kind of making pants out of it, makeshift pants out of the tunic that
I
they
never
would
knew
wear.
that.
Okay. You can actually find pictures of it online if you search for it. I've seen a few, but so it was just basically kind of dressing yourself down and preparing yourself for what you have to do. You don't want, for lack of you don't want your junk hanging out when you're fighting a war. You want it protected. You want to be able to move freely, right? You don't want to be caught up and get tied up, and be able to, for someone to grab your tunic and pull you down easily. You know what I'm saying?
Yep.
I just did a search here. It says, what did I search for? Gird your loins picture, and it actually shows them like a step-by-step way to do it. So that'll give you a good idea, Daniel.
Cool. Thank you, buddy. I'll check that out. Makes sense. Prepare yourself. Like, get ready for battle and, wrap yourself up.
Yeah. So, if you're a farmer, if you're out, tending the field, you probably don't have a lot of tight clothing on, you're kind of casual, you're doing your daily routine. But if the alarm sounds, and you have to go tend to business, then you're going to want to be, dressed a little differently, and you ain't got time to go change. So you just tie things up and move.
I'm so glad you asked about that, Daniel Austin, because I thought girding it up meant like protecting it so that nothing can break through the barrier of your truth. But that's
well, that is, in a sense, that is what it is. You're protecting yourself, so it is a sense of protection, but it's on many levels.
Gotcha.
It seems kind of awful, a reminder that we're always in a battle. We operate like that all the time.
Yep.
Yeah, that's good.
Preparedness. So if you're doing that to your mind, how do you do that to your mind? How do you prepare your mind for battle?
The word.
There you go.
Daily prayers.
That's right.
Simple obedience.
And I'll say this, Daniel Houston, that the daily prayers work better than any antidepressant I've ever taken in my entire life. From the time I was 10 to 20, I took a bunch of them as a kid before I knew any better. But now, as an adult, in my 40th year, praying is the only thing that works to take anxiety and fear away. And the daily prayers are so beautiful for that. Thank you for sharing.
Amen.
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 All right. There was something that I wanted to show you. again, I'm kind of hoping that it's the word that I think it might be there in verse 13. Yes. Hope for the joy, vekavu lasimcha, shetavo lachem, which will come to you, behitgalut Adonenu Yeshua HaMashiach. Who knows what hitgalut is?
Of going back and revealing.
Revelation.
Literally an unveiling, taking the veil off of the eyes, taking the blinders off of the eyes. Okay. And so and of course, that's the name of what?
Revelation.
The book of Revelation. So it's almost like Kepha, who wrote this before Yochanan wrote the Hitgalut. It's almost like he's given us a tiny little prelude to it. I don't think it's a coincidence that he used that word. Okay. Shetavo lachem behitgalut Adonenu Yeshua HaMashiach. So hope for that with joy. And he'll come to us in Revelation. Of course, that he's revealing himself to the whole world at the end of that first 7 years. Right? So he's going to be unveiled. He's going to peel back the clouds and descend, and the whole world shall behold him. Okay? So that's what it's talking about, but it's so much more than that.
That's reminiscent of that passage in 25. And he will destroy on this mountain the surface of the covering cast over all people, and the veil that is spread over all nations.
Yep.
And it's interesting, too, that Heat Galut means taking the blinders off your eyes, and Yom Teru'ah means great awakening. They're both like, open your eyes to the truth of what's already there, you know?
Okay, so we're going to Romans chapter 13.
Romans 13. No.
Verse 11, know this also, that now is the time and the hour that we should awake from our sleep. For now, life is nearer to us than when we first trusted. The night is far spent, the day is at hand. Let us therefore cast off the works of darkness, and let us put on the armor of light. Let us walk decently as in the daylight, not in clamor and drunkenness, not in the practice of immorality, not in envy and strife, but clothe yourselves with Adonenu. It's kind of a similar idea to what we were just talking about. Yeshua HaMashiach, and disregard the lusts of the flesh. But now is the time to awake from our sleep. Any comments or questions about that?
I think that just goes back to they were expecting it in that day too. It's like we've been expecting it for 2,000 years for him, for the return.
Exactly. And if he could say that 2,000 years ago, that the night is far spent, the day is almost here, pretty sure we can say it now.
It reminds me of the sleeping women also, the sleeping virgins. Awake, the time is near.
That's right. And this is what Shaul is talking about in Ephesians chapter 5. For previously, I'm in verse 8, you were ignorant, but now you are light in Adonenu, and should live therefore like children of light, for the fruits of light are found in all goodness and tzedakah and truth. And you must discern that which is acceptable before Adonenu. Have no part in the unfruitful works of darkness, but rather condemn them. For it is a shame even to speak of the things that are done by them in secret. For all things that are condemned are exposed by the light, and anything that is revealed is light. Therefore it is said, awake, O sleeper, and rise from the dead, and Mashiach shall give you light. And that is almost a quote of Lecha Dodi. And so I believe that Lecha Dodi was already being composed way back at this time. All right? Watch, therefore, that you live a glorious life, not as foolish men, but wise, who take advantage of their opportunity, for these are difficult days. Okay. We didn't get as far as I want. There's a little bit more to do. I think I can do the next little section, and then next week I know what we'll start on. Okay. So we've already talked about the facts, so let's kind of recap tonight a little bit. We reviewed what the themes were, and then we kind of hammered in on that awake theme, but we also tied it to Abba, Elohim rising and passing, indignation, bringing indignation on the earth and punishing the earth in the day of his wrath, beginning at the same time that you've got this joyous wedding thing going on up in heaven. Down here on earth, you've got all this calamity and tribulation and indignation going on. So that's kind of what we were just shoring up right here, is in order to escape that, you kind of have to be awake. Okay? And so we talked about the themes of Yom Teru'ah, and so what did we add to? So originally you answered the question, and we had the coronation and the wedding. What have we added to, and being awake? What have we added to it tonight? Theme of Yom Teru'ah. What did we add to it tonight?
And that's all.
Going into the room, and then actually coming back out of the room later on.
Well, that's part of the wedding theme.
Okay.
I'm talking about a different theme that we added to it tonight.
Being watchful and awake.
Readiness.
Part of the wedding theme.
No.
The Father indicating when the house is ready.
That's still part of the wedding theme.
We become his likeness.
Are you talking about judgment?
Judgment. Thank you.
Okay. Yeah.
That was another theme of it. I told you, it's Yom Hadin, the day of judgment. It's the day of Yahweh. It's the day of wrath and gloominess and darkness and smoke and all kinds of horrible things happening. It's judgment. It's punishment. Judgment in the sense of punishment. Not judgment in the sense of weighing people's sins against them, but judgment in the sense of bringing punishment on the earth. Okay? Indignation. Wrath. Okay? The second part of it is actually reward for the righteous. And that is judgment in the sense of weighing someone and giving them their just reward. And when you're talking about, where does the judgment have to take place?
On earth?
No,
For the
No.
throne.
Presence of God.
Throne room.
but in front of the judge.
Oh, yes.
Okay, so if you go to Daniel,
Which Daniel, Houston or Austin? I'm just kidding.
Babylon. I beheld until thrones were in place, and one that was Atik Yamim, that means ancient of days, did sit. His raiment was white as white snow, and the hair of his head like pure wool. His throne was fiery flames, and the wheels thereof burning fire. Fiery stream issued and came forth from before him. A thousand thousands ministered unto him, and 10,000 times 10,000 stood before him. What does that remind you of?
Yes.
Chapter 4, right?
Mhm.
Yes.
The judgment was set, and the books were opened.
Mhm.
What books do you know about?
Book of life.
Like
Everybody
Yeah,
knows
books.
that.
the
Book
book
of
of
remembrance.
the book of works, right? Is it book of works or something like that?
There's a book of remembrance of when people speak about the name of Elohim.
That's right. Malachi, chapter 3, verse 16. Malachi. And they that feared Yahweh spoke one with another, and Yahweh hearkened and heard, and a Sefer Zikaron
Book of remembrance. Okay.
was written before him. Feared Yahweh, and that thought upon his name. When did we talk about that word, Zikaron?
With the Sabbath?
Nope.
I think it's Zikaron. I think of an arm of the Lord.
That's Zeruah.
Oh, okay. There's a Yom HaZikaron, isn't there?
Yeah.
Is
Get it. When is that?
it Yom Kippur?
Nope.
Hey, Sock.
Nope.
Dag.
There has to be Yom
Yom
Teru'ah.
It's Yom Teru'ah. We read it last week.
Oh.
Okay.
So everything that we've ever done was already written down, right? God knew the end from the beginning, didn't he?
Yes.
Right. Okay, but what we're talking about here is that when the judgment. So we talked about the fact that judgment begins. What we're talking about here is that those who ascend and are assembled around his throne are judged in the sense of what good things we did for him. In other words, our sins are not held against us, and we've accomplished some things for him, and so we get reward for it.
Amen. Thank you for that.
And so one of the things that is another thing that comes out of our Jewish culture, specifically temple era times, concerning this, is the sheep that are brought in. So what is the offering on Yom HaZikaron? What's the offering? Who remembers?
Fire, what near?
Yeah. And what's the double play on the word there?
A woman,
A wife.
wife.
Bring a wife before Yahweh, right? In the English and in the Hebrew, it actually does mean a offering of fire. But the word for fire there is misspelled for some reason, Isha, which is the same exact word for wife. And I believe it's a hint at the fact that this is the wedding day of Messiah. Okay? On Yom Teru'ah in the temple, the burnt offering, the way that it's chosen, because how does the temple get its animals for the offerings? How does that happen?
Oh, with the rod. Is that the
Yeah.
rod?
Well, you're getting ahead of me. How are the offerings, all of them, any of them, brought?
By the people, by the
By the
congregation.
people. just any old raggedy animal?
No, the first. I mean, the
Oh.
best.
The best. So everybody brought their best lamb, right?
Hmm.
And so in choosing the lambs for the olah, for the burnt offering on Yom Teru'ah, for some reason on Yom Teru'ah, they did it this way. They put them all in this pen, all of these lambs, all of these sheep in this pen, and they made it almost like a funnel where it would line them up into one single line. All right? All of them were fit for the offering. Every last one of them. They were all perfectly white. They were all perfectly healthy. They didn't have any blemishes. They were, equal in every way. So the way that they were chosen to be part of the bride, if you will, part of the burnt offering, was by blood. Blood in the sense of the blood of the scarlet worm. So they would make some scarlet, some tola'at sheni, and you should know what that is.
Mm-hmm.
And they would dip this rod in the scarlet, and they would tap every 10th lamb that would go through. So they'd get them in this line, and every 10th lamb would be marked with that scarlet ink, if you will, on its back. And that's how they would choose the offering for Yom Teru'ah. That's, for some weird reason, our Jewish people picked that method to pick the offering for that day. Why do you think that is?
Because
It's like
It's like a tithe.
an analogy that not everyone will be chosen.
yeah,
It's a tithe of a tithe.
Tithe of
Yeah.
a tithe, yes.
Because every Jewish person brought their 10th part. And they're taking the 10th part of the 10th part. So to me, it's symbolic of not everyone goes. Not everyone is the bride.
Oh, wow.
and only those that have the blood.
Only those that have the blood. Only and you have that blood by confession, by trusting confession. Okay.
And Yeshua himself called himself that Tala'at.
That's right.
I am not a man, but a worm.
Yeah.
There's one more thing I want to go over. We've got a few minutes. And it's in relation to, and it's going to, so next week we're going to go over the timeline of the Hikulu. Not in detail, but just kind of generally. And we've got some more to do in regard to Yom Teru'ah, but I think we're going to do the timeline as well. But before, at this point, what I want to get at is that the Natsal has happened. The bride has been chosen. The lambs have passed through the gate and been marked, and that has chosen the Olah. And so we said that there are 7 days in the Cheder and the Chuppah, didn't we?
Yep.
What day of the month is Yom Teru'ah on?
7.
The 5th,
What day of the month?
The first.
First.
The first.
Right, dag, the Kodesh.
yes, the 1st.
What day of the month is Yom Kippur on?
10.
10th.
How many days are in between?
After the 2, you got 8, and then 1 for the day, 7 in between.
Wouldn't there be 8? There's the first
10.
day and the 10th day, and then there's 8 solid days between.
7 days in between because the 8th day is it. I mean, if you take the 2 days out, you got 8 days. The 8th day is Yom Kippur, 7 days in between.
Okay, so Betsy gave an opinion that it's 8, and Tracy gave an opinion that it's 7. Who's right? Someone else give me an opinion.
I'm going with what Tracy said. I think she's right.
Why?
because simple. One way is because it just lines up with the idea of the world week, for one,
Mhm.
7 days. But like she said, there's 2 days of Yom Teru'ah.
There you go. That's what I wanted y'all to understand. Yom Teru'ah is 48 hours long. It's actually 2 days long. And so because it's 10 days and you have 2 at the beginning and you have 1 at the end, you only have 7 in the middle. And so after Yom Teru'ah in the temple, the high priest would take his wife into an inner chamber, a cheder, and sequester himself in there for 7 days. And he would have another woman, a young woman, a virgin, waiting outside that room in case his wife died, because he needed to have a wife in the chamber with him. And that's a 7-day period. This is temple customs that I am not making up. I've read it with my own eyes in the books I have over my right shoulder in the Mishnah. No, it's not in the Word. So he would take his bride into that chamber and have a bride waiting outside in case his wife died. That's a picture. That's all I'm saying that it is. For some reason, the priest wanted him to have his wife in there in what's called the terrible days. Those 7 days are called the terrible days. Okay? That's what we call the tribulation. Yamim Noraim. Days of terror or awe. AWE. Okay? And that's where we have to leave it tonight.
Wow.
Mm.
Really good.
Thoughts or questions or comments?
I want to know why does that one woman stand there? Why does he have to have a wife waiting, a woman waiting to be his wife in case
It's
something
not
happens?
good that man should be alone.
Okay,
Preparing for the judgment of
gotcha.
Israel. His job during that time is single-fold, is to prepare himself for Yom Kippur. And woman was given to man to be a helper to him. And it's not good for man to be alone. So he can't prepare for the biggest day of the year by being alone, but he had to be sequestered.
Gotcha.
And so if his wife died, because these men were typically old and their wives were old, he had to have a replacement. It wasn't right for him not to be married. So that's the practical reason. But I think it's a spiritual picture that God himself was giving us by putting this custom in Israel.
Yeah.
Because for 7 days, the high priest is by himself with his bride. What does that match on the map of prophecy? What does that fit? What is that a picture of?
That's all.
That's when we're with him during those 7 years.
The terrible days are going on, but we're fine because we're in there with our bridegroom.
Right.
That's right.
Daniel, on that marriage note, my question is that, like, Lindsay and I are both obviously running as powerfully as we can, and I know everybody else in this call as well, towards Yeshua, towards Elohim. When upon being not solved up, will we as human beings be together, or will it not matter anymore because we'll be with our true groom, Yeshua?
Yeshua answered this question and he said, in heaven, there is no marrying or giving in marriage because we will be like the messengers. And the messengers do not, therefore, copulate with one another. So on a physical level, and so marriage here is something different than what it is there. What we do here is symbolic of what goes on there. There is the real, here is the symbolic. Are you with me? So I think on some level, the union that we have with our physical wives here on earth will be different and probably better up there. But what it is, I don't know. I've never seen an angel. I don't know how they get along. I don't know what, but it's different. So we will be in resurrected bodies. We won't have all the same functions as we have in these bodies. We'll eat, but we have no waste. Okay? Will we procreate? I don't think so. Yeshua seems to answer that question and say no. So we will have had all our children here. So does that mean he's going to divide us and we're not going to know each other? No, I don't think that for a second.
Okay, that was my question.
Yeah.
Okay, good. I'd be okay with not making love to my earthly wife as long as we're together in heaven, holding hands, whatever,
Yeah.
because we're together.
Right. Well, he put us together for a reason, and he said it. What God has joined together, let no man separate. And our vows, we take them, and we take them. At least my wife and I took them very seriously. They're eternal. I don't think that he joined us here in order to divide us there. But I don't pretend to understand the metaphysics of it all.
That's a beautiful answer. That was actually what I was really hoping to hear. So, my itching ears were hoping to hear that.
I'm trying not to scratch itching ears. I'm just trying to answer the question.
No, I'm glad. They lined up this time.
So you can go in your kid air with your wife.
That's right. 7 days, baby.
How about years?
Years.
All right. Avinu Malkeinu, in the name of your son, Yahweh Yeshua HaMashiach, we give thanks for your word. We ask you, Abba, to affirm your word to us and correct us where we are wrong. We ask you to minister to those who might listen at a future date. And we thank you for all of your blessings. We ask you to go with us into the rest of this week. Hashem Yahweh Yeshua Mashiach. Amen.
Thank you, Daniel.
All right.
Shalom, Mom.
All right.
Shalom, everybody. Thank you, Daniel.
Love y'all. Love everybody. Bye.
Okay,
Bye.
bye.
Shalom.
See you, Daniel.
It was fun. It was good.
Dang it, I didn't record it.
Yeah, you did. No, you did. You did.
The button's on.
Huh?
Okay.